Hello everyone, today we are going to be talking about Gigant for the PlayStation Vita, also available for PC. Now, physically I believe there was an Asian version that has English that was very limited, and there's a Japanese version, but if you want the US copy, it was published by Limited One Games, and it goes for about like $80, so... But let's get into it. So this is a first-person dungeon crawl that, well, you would think probably would be a pretty open, closed bookcase with that. It's like, oh, first-person JRPG. That's probably pretty easy. But no, this does a lot of weird shit. Now, outside combat for the story, it's very visual novelty, so that part should be pretty familiar for most people. But when it gets into the actual system, many things are either simplified, different, or just straight out strange. So first thing, there's no currency, no shopkeeping, no inventory for items. All you have is a weapon, a shield, an accessory, and a food item that acts as a command, not an actual item that consumes AP, which is your source for everything. And you get these through a creature that all the characters have attached to them that can generate or upgrade weapons they have, increase their stats, and learn their abilities through it. Probably the simplest thing to compare it to would be just a completely simple sphere grid type thing that's 3 different branches with no gigantic maze like system that like the actual sphere grid in Final Fantasy X has. And outside that, in that regard, it's pretty simple. But when it gets into combat, is where things get pretty weird. So, as I said, AP is your source for everything. And there are 3 types of enemies on the map because they're not random encounters in these dungeons. Oh, no. And nor do they move. They are stationary, and there are 3 different visual cues for them. There are blue, yellow, and red. And these actually will greatly affect your AP cost. Fighting a blue enemy will greatly make them cheap, so you can spam many abilities easily or build up AP easily. A yellow is a normal, where all the costs are default, and then a red one is a heavy, which causes everything to cost fucking double. So if you got something that's 25 in a normal fight, well, hope you're happy. It's costs 50 AP just to cast it once in a heavy fight, and that can be very bad depending on what kind of moves your characters have, because you can only have up to 100 AP at one time, and if you're not spending it, you're wasting time owning it. Now, this has very, like, enemy-wise, there are only a few types and elements, and how they all grow into weaknesses and stuff, with like undead, aqua, flying, ground type, thunder, neutral, fire. The weaknesses and everything are pretty simple, but something you want to be careful about is your allies. In the beginning they only get 3 moves, but they'll very soon be able to have 6 moves at one time, but that's it. And out of those 6 moves, your character is going to have more moves, so you gotta be careful what you equip to everyone. Because say if you opt to have everyone with undead stuff and not have something else, and you run into an enemy that's strong against everything you picked, so you can lead into a really long ass dragged out fight just because you didn't have anything that could properly damage them. So you want to try and focus all the 3 allies you'll get to try and be able to balance all types of enemies, unless like you know you're gonna go into a boss fight, it's this type, and you want to range your moves for that. But when you go into a dungeon, you're gonna meet quite a few different types and group types, so you kind of have to cover your bases unless you really sure you know everything that's in there on that. Now, the other thing you have is how to put it, just kind of a rhythm game of all things. You'll build up a extra point system in your upper right corner, And once that reaches 50, you can do a short version of a rhythm game, or if you get to 100, you can do a long version of a rhythm game. Now, there were 3 main characters that each have their own little story arc with their 2 allies, but each of the 3 main characters has their own version of this rhythm game. And when you get to the conclusion part of the game where the 3 main characters join together to fight the ultimate problem of the game, you have to choose out of the 3 which one you want to use the rhythm game. But until you get to that point, as you go through the 3 different arcs of each of the 3 characters, you'll just have the leader character always be the one that uses the rhythm game. Now the rhythm game's interesting because based on how well you do at, how long you keep the combo going, you can get more damage, and you need to make sure you select the right moves. It does not give you a moment, which is one of the few flaws I feel in the game, to kind of get prepared. So you need to be sure you have the right commands up and hitting that button for that command to use that elemental type against the target you want, or you're just going to do a whole bunch of moves that might be ineffective. But the rhythm game is a fantastic way to get a lot of damage. You can get tons of hits, like you can get like up to like 50 something hits doing shit tons of freaking damage. It can do immense amount of damage, and it can save you a lot of times on some bosses, sometimes cutting a good half of their health or being a good way to finish them off depending on your strat for said bosses. Now, what's really interesting between the dungeon crawling aspect, you will actually have to fight what the title name, Gigants. There are different size Gigants. The ones in the dungeons are much smaller Gigants, but at some points in the story, you're going to fight really big Gigants, like things that are as tall as like a fucking Paris Tower, kind of fucking huge. And these boss fights are really interesting because all the 3 characters take different positions based on what they are, and the theme of each group is always the same. You have the melee close person, the range person, and the magic person, and they'll each take positions based on that in their retrospective areas that they do their combat in. And it really leads to some interesting perspectives, as like the magic character is always really far away, where you can see the entire enemy, while the melee character is right in their face, close up. These fights can be either incredibly long, or they can be very short, depending on your setup and your abilities how you built your characters and such. Sometimes they can be problematic. Other times they may not be as tough for that. But that's in general how the game is. Now, in combat, it looks really good to me. There was fluid animation on all the enemies, the bosses, the characters. It's very nice looking. It's not static at all. Though, of course, they're repeating animations, but I really enjoyed this game, and it has a really bizarre soundtrack. As for the story takes place in an apocalyptic future of the world where Gigants have invaded Earth and they have destroyed much of it, but now they have slowly focused their attacks oddly at specific positions in the world, and the cast of characters are basically trying to fight them back and reclaim the world. As each of the main characters, you'll learn their backgrounds and their motives or their complaints or their issues and such with the world, the people, or just doing their damn job. Many of them are pretty familiar types of anime trope characters and that. But the music really kinda adds a lot to it, with a few tones that sound pretty familiar for a JRPG type, but then there's a few that sound really wacky, strange, or just outright not something I would expect in a Japanese game at all. Having a very, very broad type of music some of the beginning music, or some of the really catchy odd music that I would say has a very jazzy, but there are also orchestra and very ho 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 kind of things for boss fights and that. So I mean, you get some familiar stuff and some not very familiar at all kind of elements in this. Besides that, that's pretty much what you're getting overall here, a visual novel type story. You don't have any moving around at the story, just does its own thing and then gives you a dungeon that you go in and out. You don't have places to explore or anything, so it's a very linear experience, no wheel side things or anything. Now you can actually go through the story again, because there was actually, now I could be a little off about this, so feel free to correct me, but my understanding, after the game came out in Japan, they made an update that added an epilogue and an extra version of the boss fight if you replay through the game. And my understanding, that is automatically all the way on the limited one version's cartridge. Obviously, if you got a digital version, it would either depend on when you downloaded it, if you have it or not. I would take it, considering I believe the game was out for like 2 years before it even got localized in America, that the American version had it already built into its day one version, I would imagine. But besides that, I mean, there's not really any replay value or anything. It was a very enjoyable game. It has no English dub, by the way, either. It's all Japanese dubs, so if you don't like Japanese dubs, might not be a thing. But I actually enjoyed a lot of the very odd aspects of the game. But some of the flaws I have is not being able to change out some of the abilities during combat can be a little annoying if you happen to just have one character that has one ability type needed to do massive damage against the enemy, while the others just basically do nothing if you end up in that situation. I mean, combat, I'd say from the mid to end, can either be still somewhat interesting to dragging out. Like, it basically gets to the point where each character is basically kind of just dealing with certain types of enemies, and they're the one that just focuses it down, while the other two will usually either just back up with healing or just wait to add AP. So some fights, especially a few boss fights in the later portion of the game, can get a little drawn out that way. It suffers a lot of repetitive combat syndrome in the end game. Now, something that actually gets presented to you in the end game too, you don't get access to this during in the early game, it's completely off, and then through a portion of the majority of the game, you get a version of it that basically you get this berserk mode that happens after so many turns, and changing your abilities to requiring HP instead of AP. This allows you to do a lot more moves usually. However, because it's costing you HP, it's also massively killing you. So playing your cards right, you could use it to speed up battle, but it's a risk reward system. But in the late game, you get the ability to trigger this as opposed to waiting for it to happen as either a thing that you have to overcome, or you can take advantage of it. You can just trigger it simultaneously. Now, during the majority of the game where you have no control over it, the only way to deactivate it is to trigger the rhythm game, and it resets the counter. So usually for a lot of boss fights, you want to try and go into the fight with the rhythm counter at like 50 at least. That way you can reset, and then you want to try to usually build it up again. But aside from that, I mean, that's generally how a lot of the strategies and everything boil down to. Anywho, at this point, let's go ahead and get into spoilers. So if you don't want the story spoiled or what I thought about the end, you can leave it at this point. But I would recommend, before we actually dwell into the spoilers, I would recommend the game if you can get it for a good price. If you want physically, get it for a good price. Is it worth the, like, I think right now the limited one version's like about $80 on eBay, and that's a really, like, it's an interestingly different game, and that's actually a reason I would recommend getting it. But that's a tough price to justify. That I would have to leave that to you. How much do you want a physical version for? Recommendation wise though, what I would consider the game, I think this is a good 30, maybe 39, I guess you could say 30, 40 price. Definitely not a full outright price, because this doesn't have all kinds of unique, like I said, there's a lot of reused animation loops and sprites and stuff. And, you know, like I said, it's very visual novel, so a lot of reused backgrounds, not a lot of environmental things. So obviously not a very expensive game to make. Digitally though, like I said, it is on the Vita and on PC. Now, I have heard the trophies on PC for the Steam version, because it's only available on Steam, no DRM free version, sadly for you all. I heard that there's a bug in those, so if that's something you're interested in, you might want to be careful about that. But for the Vita version, it's a pretty easy platinum, honestly. I actually platinumed it. I think it was my second Vita platinum. But this goes for $14.99 on Steam. Yeah, I would imagine that's probably the same price for, because, you know, it's pretty usual, universal. There ain't usually too often where the prices differ. Yeah, $14.99 also on PSN, so there you go. And if you don't mind getting an Asian version, it looks like a lot of, well, a Japanese version. The Asian version that has English, to my understanding, has been sold out. But I can take a quick look to see what we got here. Well, Play Asia only has, maybe, I thought I heard there was an Asian version. Play Asian has a Japanese version for $59, but I can also see there was a lot of copies for like $14 on eBay and that. So if you don't mind a Japanese copy, you can go down that route, which actually, ironically, is really close to the digital price. But if you want an English copy, you're gonna basically pay up the wazoo. Anyway, spoilers. So, each of the 3 arcs you go through, the first character is a thick-headed, idiot, naive child. The second one is a serious, I don't trust anyone and I hate the life child. And the third one is an even more naive child who lives an innocent life of not realizing she's just a biological experiment. But they lead to the grand conclusion of realizing what's going on, that the Gigants are actually running away from a really, really big Gigant called Way Gigant, title's sake, that's devouring them. So you go into another dimension to try and figure out what's up with this Way Gigant, and you find out it's on the moon, consuming the moon to try and become a big enough mass to like eat everything and shit. And it's a pretty cool boss fight. Now I haven't done the epilogue extra boss fight thing. It's something I've considered doing, especially since, as far as I can tell, nobody on YouTube has done it. So it's kind of tempting to actually maybe walk on the side and randomly do that. Maybe it's possibly. If you want me to do that, feel free to leave a comment down below on that. But knowing that, save the world, the moon will have a crater, and the normal ending, just the characters just move on with their lives, and the people who died in their minds. But I did like this game. I definitely think the two memorable things that I'll remember is the very interesting choices of music and the fact that it's just a very bizarre RPG that's way taken out of traditional Japanese RPG turn-based combat. It probably won't be everyone's cup of tea. I mean, if you're looking for a pretty normal JRPG type experience, this is not what you want looking for. But if you want something different, I can recommend this game as something definitely different, and for a digital price of $15, I think that's actually a pretty good price. It definitely gave me a very lengthy JRPG experience, not say Persona, but you know, a more normal JRPG experience of, you know, like more Final Fantasy type. You know, I'd say it's probably like a 40+ hour, depending on how much you do in the end game. But I enjoyed it. I recommend it. Anyway, if you feel like you've learned something new, please feel free to leave a like. And if you feel like you've learned nothing of interest at all, feel free to leave a dislike, guilt-free, as you leave the gates of the proving ground. I must go back to slumber as the gates close, and I wish you luck out in the proving grounds. Good day, and take well.
どうだった？私の作った朝ごはん